Just a quick slither of information to relay to you guys before the video starts. An hour after this video is released, I'll have changed my profile picture on YouTube. This is mostly so people can actually understand who I am and I'm not just using my cover photo. Anyway, let's get into the video. There's not much that we know at the current time of the Breath of the Wild sequel. The entire community has been running off of a minute video for the past year and a half now. Quite truthfully, all of us who have the privilege of speculating online know literally nothing for sure when it comes to Breath of the Wild 2, to the point where we've just added a 2 to the first game's name and have been calling it that for that period of time. But as I've said, some of us have had the pleasure of theorising on the teaser, and while we don't know anything for certain, I think that a lot of the Zelda fanbase is almost expecting an underground sort of overworld. It's definitely not a topic that we as a community have shied away from. Even as viewers of this channel and possibly other channels, you'll probably know that we all love the idea of being able to explore the depths of Hyrule. However, I think that a lot of people seem to think that the big picture of this whole idea is that we want a giant open world, but in more of an underground form. But while this is the idea that some fans would absolutely love to see, some would prefer more linear underground areas. So the whole point of this video is to discuss a few ways in which underground exploration could work in Breath of the Wild 2. This includes the open world idea and more linear idea. So let's get into some exploration on these ideas. First of all, we should probably discuss open world areas, as this is what a lot of people would like to see. First of all, let's quickly rewind time, past Breath of the Wild, past Wind Waker, past even Ocarina of Time. Let's talk a small bit about the game that built the formula, that was first expanded on in Ocarina of Time. Let's talk about The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. For many, this is a beloved game in the Zelda series. I love the game, but don't like it nearly as much as a handful of people. However, I know the importance of this game in the series. It single-handedly formed a formula that stuck around for many years. Of course, I'm talking about the Dungeon and Master Sword formula. However, the other thing that carried from A Link to the Past to Ocarina of Time was the fact that both of the games included a sort of second world. In A Link to the Past, it was the Dark World. Ocarina of Time, 7-year forwarded Hyrule. And even in newer games, we've seen this same sort of thing. For example, A Link Between Worlds included Lorule, and Twilight Princess used the Twilight Realm. Even Wind Waker had the same sort of thing, as you go to the land of Hyrule underneath the water. This trope carried on for a long while. Most games use the same sort of system, even if it was only partly similar. So why does this matter to this section of the video? Well, this is the reason why I think that a lot of the Zelda community feels compelled to at least theorise that we could see a sort of alternate world to the usual world in the next game. Like I said, we don't even have confirmation that we'll even be returning to the land of Hyrule we saw in Breath of the Wild in the sequel. But for now, we all just seem to think that the underground could be an extremely interesting idea, or perhaps even an open world. So how exactly could the underside of Hyrule act as an area that really absorbs the player? Well, I think that it would have to do in most part with the scenery of the underground. Let's talk about some cool ideas if the underground does turn out to be an open area. Well, first of all, and most obviously to me at least, I would absolutely love to be able to use a raft in the underground caverns. We've seen in the teaser trailer that if the underground is playable, then there most likely will be some areas that have water. The mysterious creature that the princess and hero of Wilds were riding in the teaser was actually drinking from one of these areas. But let me filter myself for a second, as I'll talk more about rideable mounts later on. If you watch the channel, you'll know that I love the rafting feature in Breath of the Wild. Being able to set sail wherever there was a little raft for Link was an amazing idea in concept, but it was such an underplayed factor in the game that it basically changed nothing unless you really wanted to use the raft in my experience. Needing to use rafts in the caverns in the next game would really change up the feel of the game. Since we might not be using the Sheikah runes again, it'd be really nice to not just use Cronus every time I need to cross a river. Having to use rafts instead to cross large gaps filled with water would feel very empowering and would be extremely satisfying. Having to actually find a raft would be half the battle. I'm thinking of speculating about underwater exploration at some point, so I won't drone on too much about this idea, but I think that the game could definitely be positively impacted by using some underwater exploration. Something like being able to dive into calm rivers to grab resources, such as luminous stones, could also be very exciting to change up the gameplay from time to time. Now that I've finally decided to stop talking about water-themed happenings under Hyrule, let's talk a slight bit more about the actual openness of the cavities in the ground. I was a giant fan of the climbing in Breath of the Wild. Being able to climb pretty much every single surface in Breath of the Wild was definitely part of the fun. It's fun to basically puzzle your way up to Ikala Tower for the first time, or trying to climb the dueling peaks. I mean, this was one of the first things that I did in Breath of the Wild for Pete's sake. So what do I think they could do with climbing while exploring in the sequel? Well, I think that we could see areas in the caves slightly obstructed by the cavern ceiling, so that you're always keeping a keen eye out for more of the secret areas. Perhaps some of these secret areas could house the Breath of the Wild 2 response to the shrines. In fact, some shrines had a very similar system to the one that I just explained. There's some cool caves in Breath of the Wild that just house shrines and Korok seeds. What if one of these areas actually housed one of these open format dungeons? I'll reel myself back in, as there's absolutely no way we'll get that sort of exploration in the next game. What can I say, I'm a pessimist. But it's definitely a possibility. Next, I'll talk a small bit about how animals could work in some underground areas. This could technically make more sense in a more linear format, but I'll still mention mounts just a small smidge here. As I've already stated, we have seen that the next game could issue some new animals being rideable, and it looks like the animals themselves have the chance to store stuff. I think that it would be really cool to go into an underground section with your trusty rhino, or whatever you've tamed, and to come out with a ton of resources that are all in your pet's inventory. Now, normally I probably wouldn't even entertain this idea, but we've been told that the Zelda team has been taking a lot of inspiration from Red Dead Redemption 2, and that game did utilise a system in which your horse can hold weapons for the player. So, again, this is speculation and it's definitely possible. I think that we're finally coming to the end of talking about an open world underground area. However, I'd like to talk a little bit about some new materials that we could see if you're searching underground, and how we'd find these materials. In Breath of the Wild, you could find certain metals in ore deposits. I feel that this would probably be used again. I don't feel like there's any reason not to, but there's a chance that we could see way more of these deposits scattered around the map, beckoning you towards them. But if the deposits end up housing nothing, then you wasted your weapon's durability on just that. Nothing. A relatively simple system, but also an effective one. What kind of new materials do I think we could see in the sequel? Well, I think that since the game may have a larger emphasis on mining in the underground, that we could in fact see some more real life elements brought to the table. A good example of a well-known material in the real world that isn't in Breath of the Wild is emeralds, or perhaps amethyst. There's a ton of materials that weren't in the first game that are sure to come to the next game. Now, let's quickly talk about the stuff that will most likely be in the underground, if there is one at all, whether it's linear or open-ended. First of all, downright beautiful scenery at times. Even in the Breath of the Wild 2 teaser, we got some really nice looking areas. I'll come back to this scene soon, but the scene of the Doer of the Wilds on the bridge was utterly beautiful. It was both stunning and engrossed a sense of mystery to what lurks beneath the bridge. Perhaps it's a vast valley of water, much like we see in real life caves, or maybe it really is just a dark, never-ending abyss. It's interesting to ponder some of these thoughts, especially since in a year we could be playing this game. That still blows my mind. And of course, we can't talk about the first game's beauty without discussing how amazing the animals play into that factor. So I think that we'll definitely see some underground only animals, perhaps even some of these rideable mounts could come inside of the caverns. I expect to see more rats, geese, and just thematically darker animals, to really drive that darker theme into the player. But one thing is for sure, no matter what, the sort of man-made structures that are in the caves that we've seen so far will almost certainly be present wherever you go, whether the caverns take a more open or linear approach to gameplay and design. I think that the amazing set pieces that were seen in Breath of the Wild with the broken houses and all this other stuff will probably be seen again. If the Zonai play a larger role in the next game, we'll probably see some of them in the caverns hiding away, yada yada yada. We all know that cool areas will definitely be present if the game does indeed take us to the underground, so I don't need to talk about it too much. Though it is an interesting conversation when you bring up villagers. I mean, could small villagers really be present in a sort of mine? I don't know, but I guess time will tell. Leave your opinion on that in the comments. But now onto a more linear format and what that could do for the caves. The more linear format would definitely pull in a ton more from the likes of the older Zelda games. You enter a hole in the overworld of Hyrule and suddenly you're in a tunnel-like area. You follow the tunnel down until you get to a dungeon or something like that, with small shrine alternatives on your way. However, I would personally think that if they pulled it into a more linear format, that they would still make the caves slightly complex to traverse. More akin to a maze, that you have to run around the cave finding hints that allude to a landmark. I think that if they are to use a more linear format for this sort of exploration, then they would have to use it more areas where you can crawl, like in past Zelda games, so that the Hero of Wilds has to physically crouch down to get underneath certain areas to reach the hero's goal. Apart from all this, I don't think there's too much more to talk about in these more linear areas, so let's jump over to my conclusion. No matter what, this game will definitely be amazing, even if underground traversal doesn't turn out to be a real thing, and while even I would probably prefer a cool open format underground area, I don't think it's too likely. But never say never. But just to clarify for the minute, I do still firmly believe that the underground will have a part to play. but I can only hope that it's its own open world and we can explore and scavenge resources, and kill absolutely daunting enemies. Perhaps with the likes of the Redeads and Dead Hand. So, did you think that I missed something? If you want me to speculate slightly more on something, then please do ask me in the comments, as I'll get around to replying to everyone who asks. And with that said, thank you so much for watching. I've set myself a goal to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year, so I'd really appreciate it an absolute ton if you could go down there and hit that subscribe button. And of course, like the video if you enjoyed. If you'd like to join all of these lovely people on screen, then please do consider donating to my Patreon, if you can and of course want to, as it helps to create better videos and obviously gives you guys some benefits yourselves. All of my social media is in the description. My Twitter, Instagram and Twitch are all down there. I even started doing a Breath of the Wild permadeath the other day, so it'd be great to see some of you in a stream soon. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I'll see you all next week. Please stay safe.